Hi everybody, this is Grace from the camping department and I'm going to teach you a little bit about stand-up paddleboards. Now, it's assumed that stand-up paddleboards have been around for a very long time and they didn't necessarily originate in one place. There are signs of stand-up paddleboards all over the globe, including Peru. The idea that the gondoliers in Venice are sort of like a stand-up paddle craft, but kind of the contemporary form of stand-up paddleboarding we see today is generally believed to be originated from Hawaii. And it really took off as a sport in the early 2000s. So with paddleboards, there are several different kinds. One of them being fiberglass paddleboards, the other being inflatable paddleboards, and we'll get to that in just a second. But the really cool thing about stand-up paddleboards is you can use them for really so many different activities on the water. It's pretty awesome. So I like to paddleboard personally because it's a really interesting way to explore the water. It gives me a little bit more mobility freedom when I am paddling my board. It also is a little bit more relaxing, I would say, and again, easier to move around than a canoe or a kayak. Paddleboards are used for yoga, they're used for whitewater paddling, they're used for racing. Some people surf on paddleboards. The possibilities are really endless with them. So again, I mentioned that we have fiberglass paddleboards and we have inflatable paddleboards. Both have their pluses and minuses. I personally like inflatable paddleboards, primarily because they pack up into a backpack like this. When I take mine out onto whitewater, it will bounce off of rocks rather than crunching rocks. But fiberglass paddleboards are great too. It just depends on what you are trying to use them for. So like I mentioned, we can use paddleboards for anything from yoga to whitewater surfing. And depending on the type of paddleboard or the activity that you are doing with your paddleboard, the paddleboard is going to look a little bit different. So let me pull mine out for you. Again, it's an inflatable paddleboard, so it packs up into this nifty little carrying case. And I have a lot of stuff in this carrying case that comes with me. One of them is my PFD. Anytime that you are out on the water doing any sort of boating activity, whether that's canoeing, kayaking, paddleboarding, anything like that, you have to be wearing a PFD and it needs to be on, fitted properly, and secure. So I couldn't go out there and just be paddling around with it open like this. I would have to buckle it up, zip it up, tighten it up to do that. Let's see, I've got some dry bags and boxes in here. These are to keep some of my gear dry that I don't want to get wet. These are two different options that you can have. One is a dry bag. If I wanted to keep my phone dry, for example, I just drop it right in here, roll that up, and clip it like that. With a dry box, you open it up, put whatever you want in there, seal it up. That's another option. So, here is my paddleboard. Obviously, as is, it's not going to be very useful to me in the water. So, I'm going to take a moment now to blow it up. This might take a while. So, once I get it started, I'll see you all when it's done. Okay, Now we have it just about pumped. So we can talk about the parts of a paddleboard. So again, this is an inflatable paddleboard. Looking at it here, the top of the paddleboard is called the deck. The front of the paddleboard is called the nose. The back of the paddleboard is called the tail. Now, on this board, there are a few things that we can also talk about. I have a grab loop in the middle, so I can pick it up and easily transport it places. On the back side of this board, these are my fins. So the fins help to keep the paddleboard stable in the water. It would be a lot harder to keep it upright without these fins. So again, those help keep it stable. On the front and the back of the board, we have what are called D-rings. And these D-rings you can use to attach things, tie things, whatever you want. My paddleboard also has some cord to help store gear. And those are the main parts. Now with a paddleboard, when you have it, oh, and the sides are called the rails of the board. So with a paddleboard, you might also use a leash. This is my leash that I put on the board. I attach it to the back D-ring. And it can actually be worn in two different ways. So the first way that you can wear it is on your ankle. That's kind of what you would see generally if somebody was surfing, for example. That's one way. I would attach it right here. The other way, for me, with this specific leash, is I can actually put it around my waist and buckle it in this way. And the reason I have this option is because this is a Whitewater leash, and this is a quick release belt. So whenever we're doing anything in whitewater, we never want to be fully attached to an object because that becomes a safety hazard. So if I were paddleboarding in whitewater, I fell off, and I needed to get detached from my paddleboard, all I would have to do is pull this little knob here, and that would release me from the board. So this is a SUP leash. Finally, when it comes to paddleboards, you'll have a paddle. Obviously mine is in 3 pieces right now. I'll put it together. The reason that I bought a paddle that can be disassembled is because, again, I like the portability of my paddleboard. And so having a full paddle that can't come apart would be a little harder to transport. So this is a paddleboard paddle. So if you can see it here, it has one blade like a canoe paddle, but it's way longer because you're standing up rather than sitting down. So you have your blade, you have your shaft, and you have your T-grip, similar to a canoe paddle again, but a little bit longer. So this blade, it's a little bit different from a canoe paddle in that it has, I'll try and show it from different angles, it has a turn in it. And because of the way that kayak paddles look specifically, some people think that when you're paddleboarding, the part that goes back should be in the water and paddling like this. But actually when you're paddling, you would have the flat side. In this case, it's the side that doesn't have any markings really, the pattern's on this side, but it's the flat side of the blade is going to be facing towards you, and you would paddle like this. I'm not going to stand on my board since I'm not in water and I don't want to damage the fins, but this is how your blade would be in the water. So that is a a paddleboard blade. So as I mentioned before, different paddle boards are used for different things, and your paddleboard is going to look a little bit different depending on what you're using it for. So again, if you were using a paddleboard for yoga, you're going to want something that's pretty stable. So it's going to be wider, it's going to be a little bit thicker, and just overall, if it's wider, it's going to be a little bit more stable for you, and that'll make it easier to try and do yoga on a paddleboard. If you're using it for racing, for example, Your nose is going to be pretty pointy. It's going to be a fairly straight board, and again, that tail is going to be a little bit pointier, or at least narrow. I shouldn't say pointy, but narrower as well, because that is going to help keep your boat or paddleboard going straight and not turn too much, which when you're racing and trying to get from point A to point B, going straight is important. If you're looking at using a paddleboard for whitewater though, your board is going to be a lot shorter. It's going to have a very round nose and a wider or more round tail. My board personally is kind of a hybrid between whitewater and just universal usage. So that's why you see you have the nose. It is sort of pointy, but not as pointy as something could be. It's not super wide, but it's not super narrow either. And the back is fairly round. So my board, again, is kind of a universal board, good for all around paddleboard usage. I've taken it on whitewater, I just take it out on flat water. It is slightly less stable than probably one would prefer for a yoga paddleboard, so I will say I do end up in the water pretty frequently if I'm trying to do a lot of fancy moves on it. So that is the general overview of paddleboards.